again. It's such an honor to be here at the Literary Festival, but maybe even more of an honor to be here next to William Dalrymple, one of the great writers of our time. I did this book recently on India, and I think the best part of the book actually is Willie's introduction to my pictures. So I've been following your career for a long time. So it's an honor to be here. It's really, I mean, the people you've brought in this year, Don McCullen and whatnot, and one of my great heroes. So anyway, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Willie.
Thank you, Steve. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid a bit of a... Thank you. A bit of a cock-up this morning. This is meant to be Basharat's session, but he's got lost, and the pen drive with him. So we're going to have a session on photography without any illustration at all. But you can all go and buy Steve's wonderful new book at the bookshop, which will contain all the images and all the adventures that we're talking about. It is the most magnificent book ever published visually on India, ever. And
but I was under the impression that everybody got a free book.
The Steve McCurry Foundation has generally waived all rights and is donating one to on behalf of the festival. So, Steve, so let's start at the beginning. Born and brought up in the States, but ended up in Sweden.
Yeah, well, it even goes back further than that. My family, we used to subscribe to Life magazine, which no longer exists, but it was a great picture magazine. And when I was 12 years old, there was this big photo spread by a New Zealand photographer named Brian Brake on the monsoon. Yeah, Brian was a great photographer. He traveled throughout India, Kashmir, all over the place. So I saw this essay with these incredible pictures of this weather phenomenon, this rain, people running around, and I thought, oh my, I want to see that. I want to go to that place.
How old were you?
I was 12.
And at this point, where were you? Where in the
I was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, growing up, and but those images sort of stuck with me, and and so if you kind of fast forward to later on when I traveled, my whole ambition in life was to travel and see the world. So when I was 19 out of high school, I went to live in Sweden, just arbitrarily. I was looking for a place to, and just by chance, the boy, the young boy in the family, the 15-year-old boy, was an amateur photographer. And we used to go out on the weekend and sort of just click pictures just for the fun of wandering and observing. And that was a pivotal point for me because suddenly photography wasn't just about, a birthday or a monument. It was just wandering around photographing ordinary things, a dog or a crack in the sidewalk or whatever caught your imagination. So after Sweden, I went back to college and thinking, what can I do with my life? Well, maybe I want to be a filmmaker. So I started studying that, but that was actually a little bit too difficult. It turned out there was a lot more work than I thought it was. But in the course of that study, I took some still photography courses. And then I thought to myself, this is fun. Walk around, click here, click there, everything's spontaneous. Everything's sort of these serendipitous moments, and I said, forget the filmmaking. That's never going to happen. So I left school. The only job I could get at that time was working on a very small suburban newspaper, and but that was.
And where was this?
This was outside of Philadelphia, right. But these small papers, the assignments are, it's really boring pictures. And I did that for 3 years, and I was about ready to jump off the roof because I was so bored. And that's when I decided it was now or never. I had to, if I wanted to travel, I had to take some drastic steps. So I bought a one-way ticket to India. I thought,
So India was right at the beginning? Yeah.
Right at the beginning. I had done a little traveling in school, but I went to Africa for a few months and South America for.
So paint a picture. What date are we talking? What's going on in India? Is this Indira Gandhi? This is.
No, it was it was in between, I think, or was it? When was it? It was
1970.
78.
So that is.
Moraji Desai.
Right.
Moraji Desai.
So the emergencies come and go.
I believe it was Moraji. I'm pretty sure. So I'm there and wandering around, and I didn't really know much about India. I got off the plane. There's a wonderful photographer named Avinash Pashrisha who
who's still around very much.
Yeah, we were together just the other day, and he was so kind and so hospitable. He kind of took me under his wing, and I went there for countless lunches and dinners, and he advised me. He was my kind of consigliere.
And how old are you at this point?
27.
Right.
So I got off the plane. I went up to, this was in February, and I got off the plane and went up to Dehradun on the train. It was like and I was so cold. I thought, India's going to be
I started off at Dehradun. my first week in India, I was teaching in St. Joseph's Academy in Dehradun. Yeah. That was 1984 was my beginning. Yeah.
So I went up to Missouri, and again, it was snowing. I thought, whoa, there were monkeys running around in the snow. It was quite a different sort of introduction. And the trip that initial trip was only going to be for like 6 weeks. But I went here, I went there, went down to Kodi Canal in the south. I went to Goa, Bombay. And the 6 weeks ended up taking another 6 months, and then a year, and then it turned into 2 years. And I still felt like I hadn't really...
Are you, at this point, are you selling photographs to newspapers, sending them to magazines? What's happening?
Well, I sent the pictures back to my sister, but sometimes I would take them to the post office. These rolls of film I would actually take to the post office and send them back home. They would develop them and try and sell them to magazines, but it was tough. I mean, it's tough now to make a go at photography, but
it was the most difficult thing.
It was impossible. I thought this is never going to happen. But my big break was when one June of '79, I kind of wandered into Afghanistan, and that really changed the course because nobody was interested in Afghanistan in sort of the spring of 1970.
This is the very last moment before the Russians.
Yeah. Well, it was about 6 months.
6 months before.
And but when they invaded in December of 1979, suddenly all the newspapers and magazines in the world were desperate for pictures of Afghanistan. So suddenly I'm going from this kind of wandering kind of freelance photographer to getting pictures on the page 1 and page 3 of the New York Times and Time Magazine, Stern in Germany, Paris Match in France, and suddenly I went from kind of 0 to 60. And then I went back almost 2 years to the date, and National Geographic had seen my work.
And this was your first liaison with this great institution, which has kept you under its wing.
Right. So I went down there, and they said maybe we have some work for you. They said there's this place in Pakistan called Baluchistan, which do you have any contacts in Baluchistan? Would you be And of course I said, of course I have contact. Didn't even know where Baluchistan was. And so they they gave me the assignment, but when I got to Baluchistan, I realized they said, you can't, this whole province is restricted. They don't allow foreigners. So I thought, oh my God.
At this point, people like now respectable figures like Ahmed Rashid are fighting guerrilla wars against the Pakistani army.
Right, exactly, yeah. So I'm in Baluchistan. I thought it would be interesting to go into Afghanistan to show some of the Baluchi tribesmen living in Afghanistan.
And at this point, I remember my first visit to Quetta in '86, and at this point, Afghan refugees were still pouring across the border, and there were many camps around Quetta, and I remember one particular morning coming into Baluchistan from Iran, and we had this sort of magical vision of an Afghan caravan, which is sort of thing I'd only seen in your photographs, or the Micho's photographs, coming through the desert with this woman in sort of cloth of gold, burqa. And this was the kind of images you were seeing? This was...
Well, yeah, exactly. It was a very kind of romantic landscape with all this incredible things happening. So I'm in Baluchistan. I'm trying to photograph the Baluchis in Afghanistan, and I got arrested. I got put in jail in this...
Our old friends, the ISI, at you already. Yeah.
And they put me in jail. There was no food. They took my passport. And I thought, now I'm going to be expelled, and I failed. I won't be able to do the assignment. And I was there for like 5 days in this Pakistani prison. And
in the middle of nowhere, or in Quetta itself?
Well, it was a couple hours from Quetta in a very small town called Nushki, which is really obscure. And this is before, I'm sure they didn't have a telex machine. There maybe, I don't even know if they had a telegram office there. So it took them 5 days to figure out, who the hell I was, because for all they knew, maybe they thought I was running guns, or I was a spy, or I was,
or a Russian,
or a Russian. Yeah. And so after 5 days, they literally just opened the door. But right at the end, they put these manacles on my legs, and I thought that's kind of extreme.
You must be one of the last living people to have been manacled. Steve, so this is now Zia's Pakistan. America is beginning now to cozy up to Zia. Saudi Arabia and the CIA are setting up in Peshawar, beginning to arm the Mujahideen. And Peshawar is suddenly turning into a sort of Berlin with different intelligence agencies looking at each other, the young bin Laden perhaps just beginning to arrive. Because Peshawar was the place that you made your entry into Afghanistan, famously, wasn't it?
Well, the game was, at that time, for journalists and photographers, was to show up in Peshawar, make contact with one of these political groups, and then they would sneak us into Afghanistan. The problem was that although we didn't really have permission, and the border guards, the police, the security wasn't informed that they should let us go. So we were I was again arrested, put in jail overnight. Many times I was caught on a bus and sent back to Peshawar. So, it was very difficult to get in to cover the story.
Were you worried by the physical challenges? Because, many people, I never did that stuff going in with the Mujj. I stayed cozily in Peshawar. But people that did describe these 50-mile forced marches and things, were you worried just about being physically up to marching with the Mujj?
Yeah, they would get up. We had to walk everywhere. There were no motorcycles or buses or cars or taxis. So they're going up and down these mountains. They get up and pray before sunrise. They may or may not have a cup of tea, and it's still dark. We're going up the mountains, and I thought they're going to kill me.
Were you very physically fit at that stage? Or?
I was reasonably physically fit, but not like that. And I got these big blisters on the bottom of my feet, and I had all this equipment in my clothes, and sometimes they would help carry my stuff, and sometimes they would get, we'd be in a big group, And I remember them looking for me to give me my stuff back, and I would kind of hide to keep from having it. Because we would walk literally all night long. We would start walking after sunset sometimes, and there were many times walk in order to avoid the helicopters.
So the Russian helicopter gunships are looking for you.
Yeah.
They're searching the valleys.
Right.
And did you ever get shot at? I mean, you must have been. Shot at by...
Oh, all the time. All the time. All the time. And, they sometimes, you think you're with a band of, really smart rebels or these moods that they knew they were really skilled. We'd get lost. Suddenly we realized, oh no, this is the wrong valley. We've climbed the wrong mountain. Let's go back and start over again. Literally. And I remember we were trying to go between. There's a valley which had been the Afghan army was surrounded it with tanks. Every few hundred meters there was a tank, and we tried to slip in between these tanks in the middle of the night. And I remember one.
How far apart were they?
A couple hundred meters.
Oh.
And they were firing flares off so that it would illuminate. And I remember this one soldier dropped his rifle. And in the middle of the night, it made this incredible. And I thought, oh my God, they're going to. And it's completely clean. There was not a rock or a tree. And I thought they're going to flares it. They're going to see it. They're going to shoot us. Because these soldiers were so freaked out themselves. They would just fire into the night, just whatever, So anyway, it was a dangerous time, and we would. I don't speak Pashto, and often I was with these fighters, and I didn't know where we were going, and it's this life and death decision. Do I go with this group or that group, or they want to take me into this battle, and then if you decide you don't want to go, well, then what do? You're on your own, and it's like it was really very stressful, to say the least.
And how long were these tours? You were in for 2-3 weeks, or
2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
You go in, so you have to run the gauntlet of getting into Afghanistan,
avoiding the Pakistanis.
Right, and then you're trying to figure out, who do I trust? What are they? They're going on an operation. Well, what does that mean? Come with us. We're going to go fight. And
were you with one particular group? I mean, many people went in with Masood, for example.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I would change groups inside. I would be with Masood's group, and then I'd go with another group, Galani or Rabbani or whatever. And but then after you were finished your work, then you'd have to get back into Pakistan and then run the risk of them confiscating your film. So the whole thing was complicated.
I have many friends who were in Peshawar at that time, and this is the period when you begin to get a cleavage between what the Americans want, which is basically trying to support the more secular end of things like Masood, and then what the ISI and the Saudis want, which was Hekmatyar. And I remember there's a particular moment, I can't remember which year, 1981 or something, when the head of French intelligence, who was posing as a journalist in Peshawar, was shot. He had an assassin's bullet at the back of his skull. And that was the moment when suddenly you started to get severe rivalries between the different groups, which added to the dangers for journalists going in because they could get caught. And Hekmatyar began to develop. It was the first time that you had someone on the fundamentalist end of the spectrum regarding the West as the enemy rather than the supplier of arms and the source of the money to fight the Russians. Did you get caught up between all that? Did you ever come across...
Well, this guy, Hekmatyar, was a really...
nasty piece of work.
Nasty. He actually had one of my translators, assassinator, killed, who had worked for the BBC. So I stayed very far from this Hizb Islami and that group. I stayed with the more moderate groups, and no, they were a bad lot. So I didn't get into that.
And this is now the 80s. We had yesterday Don McCullin talking about, in a sense, an earlier generation of war photography. He was in Cyprus, Lebanon, the big conflicts of the 70s, Biafra, and then most of all Vietnam. And Don was saying yesterday, he had this real death wish. He was in there in My Lai and the Tien Tsin offensive and some of the really big battles, and would be in there, watching. The regiment he went into had 50% casualties. Were you ever in that? I mean, in a sense, I associate Don more with the actual fighting of war and pictures of shell-shocked soldiers, while I've got more images of sort of destroyed houses, Mujahideen praying. In a sense, you have two very different flavors, you two. But
well, yeah, I was never.
You're less obsessed with war, more into Afghanistan, is that?
Yeah, I never considered myself a war photographer. Because men shooting at each other and all that. That was never really what that was not my ambition. I was more interested in the civilians, the people who were caught in the middle between these two factions. So no, the whole combat thing,
it was an obstacle for you taking the pictures rather than the object you were trying to shoot.
I never thought it was a good idea to be killed for taking a picture. It was just so. And again, the story for me was really the families and the children out playing and getting blown up by a rocket or a landmine. There was so many thousands of people who stepped on landmines. So for me, that was the real human story, rather than men playing, at shooting each other.
Do you think, though, that your images made a difference in America? Were people seeing your images? Did you feel a palpable reaction to them?
Well, I think I'm not sure. I know that, when I was working on that newspaper in Philadelphia, I used to go to the library and look at Don McCullin's books. And I thought, this is amazing.
I remember seeing at age 15 at my school.
Yeah.
We had this crappy library, but they had, for some reason, Hearts of Darkness.
Yeah.
And these extraordinary war images of,
No, it was really, no. So I was, but for me again, the whole all my work, I think, in Afghanistan or I went to Lebanon. I was in the Gulf. It was always more of a human or an environmental approach to.
And you were working for National Geographic rather than the New York Times, presumably.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, but when you think about pictures that change public opinion, I remember the work of the picture of Nick Oot, who photographed that girl who had been napalmed in Vietnam, and she's running down the highway naked, fully naked, her clothes burned off her body. And
her back burnt off.
Yeah. And the New York Times, to their credit, ran that picture, I think, on page 1. Here's a child, frontal nudity, but yet the power of that picture, it just blew people away, and people started to think, well, maybe Vietnam isn't such a good idea after all. But for my work, I think that pictures can change people's perception in a small way, and maybe there's an accumulative effect. The more pictures they see of Afghan refugees, the more they come to the realization that somebody needs some help.
So tell us about the Afghan girl.
Yeah, well, that was a picture which I think inspired a lot of people to go work in the refugee camps. So that was positive. It didn't. Until we found her again, 17 years later, that picture had no. This was nothing that she was aware of or knew anything about her, and so. But I think that her look, her dignity, the fact that you can, she's an orphan, she's a refugee,
and you can see the trauma.
And you can, but yet she still has this will, this human spirit to move on, and a very direct gaze, and not particularly unhappy look. I think that I know Afghans have always been very proud of that picture. I several times I've met an Afghan taxi driver in either New York or Washington. And once we start talking about Afghanistan, and I tell them about the picture, at the end of the ride, they said, no, you don't have to pay. We don't want any money. And for especially an Afghan taxi ride, that's quite a rare thing.
For the geeky photographer enthusiasts in the audience, could you talk technically? What film you're using Kodachrome always, and what kind of cameras?
Well, I used Kodachrome for 25 years.
You were the poster boy for Kodachrome.
Yeah, it was the best film ever made. And just a technical note about the picture, it was one of these rare, maybe even once in a lifetime situations where all the elements that make up a good picture, the light, the background, the expression, the emotional component, everything lined up perfectly. And I didn't really have to do a thing. The only thing I had to do was to make sure the picture was in focus and the settings were correct. But the whole success of the picture just had to do with her look and the light. The light played a major role in that picture because it was 11 o'clock in the morning, bright, sunny, but it was filtering into this tent, and it created this really wonderful sort of light on her face, and the background was perfect.
Light seems to be something which is a constant throughout. You're very aware of light and the play of light.
Right. No, light in photography is everything. I mean, of course, for me, the primary element in a picture should be the story. You want some emotional component. You want a picture should sort of take you somewhere, should change you or delight you or inspire you or make you laugh or make you cry. So to me that's and I think that the Afghan girl, I think, takes us on a particular journey, and you try and imagine like what's her life like and where is she from, and all those sorts of things.
Just go back again, in a sense, to the process. So what's at this stage in your career? You're now working for National Geographic. You're beginning to become famous internationally. What's your working method? What cameras are you using? Do you have a dark room in Peshawar? I mean, what's your process? Do you go back to New York to do all the work or selection? Or?
Well, no, back then, I sent everything back to National Geographic, and I wouldn't see the pictures for 2 months.
And they would select. It wasn't you doing the editing.
But when I came back, I would. But when I did the Baluchistan story, I didn't see the pictures for 6 months. So you're shooting every day. You're shooting, and you don't see anything. You don't even see. You get somebody in the magazine sending you a telex or a telegram saying, "Oh, there are a couple good pictures here and a couple good pictures there," but you're completely clueless. That's why digital photography today is so great, because we can see everything instantly, and we know if the light's right or if the composition is what we want or if the camera's working. I mean, sometimes if the lens gets...
Or you've got one little bit of dust in your
on the
camera,
sensor.
and you have a hole straight through the film. And,
So now you can... I mean, I knew photographers when we were shooting film that the lens was stuck at 1.8, and they're out on a sunny day shooting away. This is wonderful, and it turns out all the pictures are useless or ruined. So that you don't have that.
But you
problem.
were a famously late convert to digital.
Well, I started in about 2004, and I wasn't really. I had hoped that I could finish out my career with film, and I thought, this is but it came on so fast that it was clear that you don't want to be sort of left behind. And also, National Geographic, the whole tide had turned, and they weren't demanding that we shoot digital, but the writing was on the wall that you got to get on the train before it leaves the station.
And so, did you sort of, belatedly have lessons in Photoshop and this kind of stuff, or?
Well, I always had an assistant travel with me. I mean, they always had. I hired some really smart Afghan assistants who knew about this a lot more than I did, and I always had somebody with me. I take somebody from home who could kind of download. In the beginning, this was way over my head. I didn't have a clue about the whole, backing things up in hard drives. And we put everything on CDs back then, and it was a nightmare.
So from the Afghan war winds down, and like many people, in a sense, you lose a war and you lose a job. Did you find it easy to move on from Afghanistan?
Well, at that point, I really wanted to do different things. I wanted to go different places. I wanted to see other parts of the world. I went to Yugoslavia. I went to Germany. Then I photographed the Gulf War. So I wanted to branch out, and life is short, and you want to try different things. Even now, I want to dabble in different parts. I want to go to Cuba. I want to go to Madagascar. I want to go to Iran.
But it remains, nonetheless, the patch of land, I think, between Afghanistan and Southeast Asia that people associate you with.
Yeah, I would say that my photographic beat has been, I would say most of my career, in fact, has been between Afghanistan over to, say, Burma, and then Tibet to the north and Sri Lanka to the south. That's where I've really...
So when did Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia kick in? When were you beginning to work in those areas? There's wonderful pictures of... there's fantastic Cambodian pictures. Extraordinary. Yeah.
Well, so I made several trips to Afghanistan. I started working for National Geographic in Baluchistan. And that's when I suggested that we do a story in the monsoon. But I also, in my early days in India, had been given a copy of Paul Theroux's The Great Railway Bazaar.
He was here last year.
Yeah. And so I read that and I thought, why not do a photo essay on a train journey across India, across the subcontinent? So I proposed that. In fact, I did those two stories, I think, the same year. And in fact, The Afghan Girl was also at the tail end of 1984. So those three stories I did almost kind of simultaneously, and it actually...
The Afghan Girl, the Indian trains, and the third?
The monsoon.
Monsoon.
All done, I would say, almost in the same year. So in a way, my best work in my life is,
Your annus mirabilis.
Yeah. So, what have I done since?
What date is that?
84.
84.
And the magazines were published, in 85.
And you then did a book on Monsoon. Monsoon became a self-standing volume.
Yeah, and I did a book with Paul Theroux on the train trip. And
with that great picture of the steam train passing the Taj, which has now been used on the front of every tourist magazine a million times. Yeah.
I don't know. I think I may be wrong, but I think that was the first time a photographer had juxtaposed a steam locomotive with the Taj Mahal, because there was one sort of a shunting track which they would use to change locomotives, and that's when I realized that these two things would line up. So that was, and then I went back a few years ago. That track is gone. The trees in the picture are grown. There's homes, and you would never think that there had been a track in that particular place.
What's odd about being the sort of photographer you are is, in a sense, there's two different games at play. There's the magazines, who are paying for the trips and who are your primary employers. But you've also got an art gallery thing going at the same time. When did you start having exhibitions of all this material? I've seen exhibitions of your stuff. I was wandering around Paris last year, and there were two different Steve McCurry exhibitions going on. Yeah.
Well, we try and make our way in the world the best way we can, whether it's exhibitions or print sales And I realized early on, 15 years ago, that the magazine market and making a living as a photographer doing magazine work, those days were kind of coming to a close. Not that I still work for magazines, but not the way I had. So, and
Because there's less money around, or they're paying you less, or what?
the assignments. I used to work on an assignment for National Geographic 6 months, 8 months on one story. And
they'd put you up in hotels, they'd fly you around. And,
everything was first class. No, seriously. All the flights were first class.
I hope you've got a decent hotel with a Constable given you.
We go to Paris or London, we'd stay at the very best hotels, order the best wine. No, we didn't order any wine.
And that began to wind down as profits began to decline with the rise of the
internet.
internet.
Well, the circulation of National Geographic had gone from like 11 million, and it probably went half of that. So those days of 6-month assignments became 8 weeks or 6 weeks, and we were not flying first class. We weren't even flying business class. We were flying way back in the back of the plane in the middle seat, and we were staying in not the best hotels, but like a 2-star hotel.
So what came in to fill that gap for you was exhibitions.
Yes. So I started. I wanted to make books. I had this enormous archive with maybe 1 million pictures.
I've been to your New York archive with it.
Yeah.
Steve has got a flat on the one floor where he actually lives, and then below it an entire flat that's just negatives and
right. So I thought, okay, I have to start publishing this work. So I did books, and then from the books, exhibitions, and then print sales, which is now a significant part of my sort of life.
And what's your selection process? I mean, you've got obviously tens of millions of images. How do you pare them down and select them? Do you put them on a wall and see which last longer, so take them down, or what's the...
Yeah, well, I literally go through my work from 20 or 30 years ago several times a week. I'm there looking through pictures and scanning pictures, digitizing pictures. So that's a constant process. And, it's when you're looking at, you're in a village or in a place, the best picture really eventually kind of jumps out at you. And when there's more than, maybe there's several pictures, I just scan them all. And what I'll do is at the end, I'll print the pictures. I'll make a big stack of prints, and I'll start showing them to friends and family.
And see how people react to them.
And see which pictures people connect with. And eventually there's a kind of a, winnowing out process, and you come up with what you think is the picture which not only I like, but pictures which other people like too.
And have you had in your career great mentors at National Geographic or publishers who've been a major influence in the selection of your work and the direction of your work?
There was, for me, the big influence, I think, of my photography, my career has been Henri Cartier-Bresson, who was a fellow Magnum photographer. He was the great...
just in case anyone doesn't know about Magnum, maybe just give a little...
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, Magnum Photo Agency was started by Henri Cartier-Bresson, a French photographer who...
The great
photographed in the 30s and the 40s. He was the last... he photographed Gandhi the afternoon that he was assassinated, and...
using tiny little Leicas.
Yeah. He has a great story about his encounter with Gandhi. And then the next, that night, he photographed Nehru announcing to the world that, Mahatma Gandhi had died. And he photographed partition. He photographed events in China. So, but he did it, so he was traveling the world photographing, but he did it in such an elegant, beautiful...
His was the famous image of Nehru flirting with Edwina Mountbatten.
Yeah, exactly.
And
exactly.
Dickey looking on rather...
Yeah. So he was, and he had a great sense of design and composition. So he started this agency, which was really developed to protect photographers' their copyright, and so we kind of banded together, and we felt that there was more strength in photographers having this cooperative. And Robert Capa was one of the founders. So anyway, I would go to...
Capa, who finally landed on a landmine
in Vietnam.
Vietnam.
Yeah, it was killed. But I would take
and took the famous images of the Spanish Civil War.
Spanish Civil War. He
Yeah.
was one of the first photographers on Normandy Beach, and he was Kappa was
Sword
Hungarian.
Beach. Was he?
Hungarian, and he changed his name to Robert Capa because it was an easier name to remember.
And Magnum has had most of the great photographers of the 20th century and 21st century. It's a limited group, isn't it?
There's a very limited, it's kind of a fraternity of these like-minded. Don McCullen had a loose affiliation. I know that everybody wanted Don to be in Magnum. I think we did some distribution of his pictures, but Sebastião Salgado was in Magnum for many years.
And from here, Raghu Rai.
Raghu Rai, a dear friend, one of the world's... He's not only a great Indian photographer, maybe the best Indian photographer who ever lived, but he's also one of the great photographers in the world. So, and a great spirit. And I've never seen Raghu flustered. You know, I've never seen Raghu get angry.
I've seen his wife, Gurmeet, get flustered.
But an incredible human being and a wonderful photographer.
So, how many are you in this sort of this pantheon of photographic gods?
When I were about 50, and
you have to be voted in by the other members, is
that
right?
Which is a very political thing. And there's one camp of photographers who are sort of documentary photographers, and there's another camp that are art photographers, and there's this constant conflict about, we should be photographing the world and current events, and the other group doing these sort of personal, projects. So I see they're both valid, but my past is clearly in that kind of, I would say, documentary.
You kind of bridge the two groups, don't you?
Yeah, I think that, Henri was a kind of a magazine photographer in one sense, but he also, now his pictures are considered kind of great art.
Who are your gods today? Who do you look to as the great lights of photography now?
Well, I think
Salgado?
I think the greatest living photographer for me is Elliot Erwitt. He was born in Italy and then moved to France and then moved to Hollywood, and so he's a wonderful photographer, a dear friend. I think Salgado is an incredible talent.
Genius.
And Jim Knockway, an old friend of mine who has kind of
also on the Afghan beat.
Yeah, and kind of following the footsteps of Don McCullen as a kind of I wouldn't say a war photographer. I think he's more of like an anti-war photographer. So these are some of the people who I think are some of the great voices in photography today.
We're running out of time. Just before we open it up to questions, your new book, India. This is a summation of the entire width and length and breadth of your career. What's the first photograph in there?
I think it's three men sitting on a step in Jaipur. This is, you had this beautiful blue parts of the city, very interesting architecture, and then you had these three local. I think they were doing some work on the edge of the town, and they have these red turbans on, and it's just graphically, it's more of it's part graphic. The interest for me is the color and of course the graphic design. But interestingly enough, that was one of the pictures that Henri really kind of connected with. So this has always been one of my favorite pictures.
And just to close, just to say a little bit about what India has meant for you as a photographer.
Well, just to go back to the book is really more of I would say kind of a poem about places and people that kind of touched me, or memorable moments. So it's not really it's more a book about my personal journey and places and people that I think visually and emotionally I kind of connected with. It's not really an encyclopedic look at India. It's just my personal selection. But you know, as
So many famous images that we've seen on the covers of other books, just I mean, one after another. It's like some greatest hits album.
well, somebody asked me earlier today that there's a lot of the pictures we've seen before. Why not publish? But I thought my answer was, I mean, I don't know if I'll ever do another India book. I could, but I mean, I could drop dead tomorrow. I thought rather than do unpublished pictures of India, I wanted my first India book to be my what I consider my best work and my favorite pictures. So it's you know it's
and there's a fair number of new work too.
Yeah,
There's a great deal.
it's a particular look at India. It's but it's my selection for good or for bad. I mean, there's you could make a million criticisms about it, maybe about your text. No, it's great. No, I'm joking. But, you know, you put the work out there and let the chips fall where they may. I think I've, you know, had a love affair with India from almost the first time I stepped foot here. And the depth of culture, there's no place in the world like India. The ancient... it's an ancient civilization. There's a very strong connection between that past and the present. Often Indian culture permeates in other parts of the world. So it's a really strong, you know, and there's all these religions, and you have this disparity between rich and poor, and the modern world and the ancient world. It's, you know, I've been thinking back about where I've been in India and what I've done here, and I think I didn't go here, I didn't go there. There's vast areas of the country and the culture which I never saw, and I think I'll just have to keep coming back again.
And last question: future projects. We've
Well,
got our Grand Trunk Road trip together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I want to do some more work in Ethiopia. Cuba is someplace I'd like to go to. Iran, I may have a show in Iran in the near future. Place that in the American media, Iran's been demonized for decades, and I want to go for myself. And
I've just come back. It's the most amazing,
Yeah,
amazing
I've
time
heard,
to be
you know,
there. Yeah.
so these are some things that kind of keep me busy.
Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause, please, for Steve McCurry. We have time for one or two questions, I think, do we? Yeah, we have time for a few questions? Yeah. You, sir.
Good morning, sir. I just want to know your experience to Vrindavan and Mathura, the holy festival that you have captured. So how was your experience for that?
Oh yeah, Brindavan, and you know that was I went there in the first time I went there was in I think '92, and it was the most amazing. I mean, it was a bit touristic, but I was on this wall. There were all these villagers. It was a very authentic. They were just going, you know, it was amazing. It's one of the great. I mean, I think now it's become a bit more touristic, but it was.
How do you, when everyone's throwing paint around, how do you make sure you don't get it all over the lens and this kind of stuff? I mean, there's.
Well, you have to be really careful, and you are a target, but and you have to realize you're going to get color thrown on you, so you know that's just going to happen. But you want to try and keep it off. I just hoped. I just winged it. Hoped for the best.
At the front here.
Hello.
Next one here, and then.
Hello, sir. Hello, sir.
Yep.
Hi. Here. I just want to know why you choose India to cover your last Kodachrome.
That's a good question. Yeah, I got the last. I requested the last roll of Kodachrome from Kodak, and I didn't have a clue what I was going to shoot. But the last manufactured roll of Kodachrome. So I wanted to photograph iconic places and people, And because Kodachrome was vanishing, I came up with the idea, okay, so I photographed Robert De Niro. Then we got on a plane. We went to Bombay. I photographed Amitabh Bachchan. I photographed Amir Khan, a couple other people, and I went to, and then I thought, because Kodachrome, this great iconic film, is vanishing. I wanted to go to a tribe in India, the Rabari, because this was one of the great tribes, and I wanted to spend some, because their way of life is coming
and they're big on color, Rabari.
Yeah. And this whole nomadic existence is coming to an end. So I thought I'll just do some poetic pictures of the Rabari.
So Rajasthan had the last, very last shots of Kodak ever taken.
Right. And then I went back to New York, and that was the project. But I thought that what better place to photograph part of the last roll of Kodachrome than India, where I've spent much of my career.
This one here, and then we had one. Who's got the camera? Pip here, and the lady with. Yeah. And then the silver-haired gentleman here.
Steve, back to the Afghan girl here. Can you set the scene for us? Were you walking by the tent? Did you go into the tent? Were there others around? And then also, what was it like meeting her again 17 years later?
What was it like?
Set the scene for, were you walking by the tent? Were you in the tent? How did you find her? And also then, what was it like seeing her 17 years later?
Well, it was just complete happenstance. I'm walking through the camp. I heard these children's voices coming from the tent. I had nothing to do. It was getting close to lunchtime. And I thought, well, I'll just, because the light was so harsh, I thought, well, maybe if I go into the tent, it'll be nice and soft. So I go in and got permission from the teacher. And the first thing I saw was her, the Sharbat Gula, with this incredible look and everything. I thought, my God, this is going to be an amazing. So I kind of set about trying to figure out how to do that. Eventually convinced her and some of her classmates to sit for me. And so that's how that worked. It was simple, particularly no particular story. And then we got thousands of letters, people wanting to know, who is she? We want to send her money, we want to send her clothes. We want to, men wanted to marry her. It was this incredible thing. And so, years go by, I tried to find out who she was, and no luck. Everybody was telling me she's a little girl, she's an orphan. I mean, she's probably back in Afghanistan in some far-flung province. Anyway, it was like a miracle that we found her. I don't know how that happened.
How did it happen?
Well, we took her picture and literally took her picture on the refugee camp, showed it to thousands of people in the camp. We got very lucky because we found the school and the teacher who had been in the classroom that day, and eventually we were able to find her brother. And of course, once we found her brother, we were able to find her. But the photograph...
And she was sort of prematurely aged. She was very... she looked much older than she...
And to photograph a Pashtun woman in a village in Afghanistan is like impossible. It's beyond impossible. But somehow through, our fixer and a wonderful journalist, we were able to convince her and more importantly, her husband, because he really is the one who gives the permission.
This gentleman here.
Steve, you obviously started off your career as a documentary photographer. I was wondering what percentage of your later work is shot spontaneously and what percentage is sort of set up?
Well, it's all spontaneous. If I'm in a portrait situation, obviously, I think with a portrait, you can pretty much do anything you want to. It's a collaboration between you and the subject. But I think you always have to, the pictures have to be authentic. If you're taking a portrait of somebody, you want to make sure it's true to the culture. You wouldn't want to put a turban on somebody just for the sake of it being a better picture. But in journalism and what I do now, it's just literally wandering and exploring and trying to have fun and make your life worthwhile and fulfilling.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid that's all we have time for, but please let's hear it for Steve McCurry, one of the world's greatest photographers.
Can we please